All right, I'm joined by Alex Cyr, our Alpine correspondent, and Katelyn Tocci, our expert in jungle running in the wilds of Costa Rica. The ongoing joke, because Katelyn is probably in a more urban environment than either of us are. All right, guys. So this week we're going to talk all about trail running.
Nice.
I think before summertime in the Northern Hemisphere slips away from us, we're going to talk a little bit about trail running from the perspective of most of our listeners, which would be a person who probably runs a lot on the roads, lives in a city or a suburb. If and when you should get into trail running, what the differences are, what the identity of a trail runner is, how do you prepare for a trail running race, all those details. We're going to unpack all of this. And the reason why we're going to unpack all of this is because our road track nerd, Alex Cyr, has he's chosen the red pill. He's gone down the rabbit hole. He's our Alice in Wonderland into the French Alps. Alex just got back from Chamonix, where he discovered that running slow and running up big, steep mountain climbs is a hell of a lot more fun than running on the boring old track. Or is it? ? Stay tuned. But first, Katelyn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this week, little old race called the Boston Marathon opened up its application process.
It
Have
did.
you applied for the honor of running in the 2025 Boston Marathon?
Michael,
next
I
April?
was probably the first person to sign
You're
up.
person number one.
I was like, oh, this is number one. Person number one signed up, I'm asking for my permission to register for the race. Yes, I'm very excited. Of course I did. I had my alarm on. I was ready to go. And it doesn't matter, right? Because they say, this isn't a first come, first serve thing, people. And I was like, yeah, I've heard it a million times. I don't care. I just want to get it in. I want to be the first person.
There's serious anxiety about that. It's
Yeah.
actually one year I actually forgot to sign up for Boston. And then it passed they do a 5 p.m. Eastern time deadline. And I thought it was until midnight that night. And I'm like getting home from work and okay, got to get in front of the laptop, sign up for, nope. Missed the cutoff.
Oh,
Didn't
no.
sign
See,
up.
That's a nightmare.
So yeah, I think you're right to have that sign up anxiety and to get your name in.
Yep.
I'd like to know who the first person is every year. That would be a funny thing to discover.
So what'd you do? Did you pull the I'm a running journalist, can I please enter this race, or did you just miss it?
Who, me? No,
Yeah.
I just missed it. And the BAA that runs the Boston Marathon, they don't mess around, guys. They are as serious as a heart attack about all of this stuff. Perhaps maybe a touch too serious, but the Boston Marathon is actually kind of the first marathon, and they're very proud of that, and they have a lot of tradition. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance at the Boston Marathon, which is what makes it cool.
Yep.
But yeah, there was no messing around. It wasn't like, hey guys, can I play my journalist card and can you give me an entry? They're like, no, not a chance. So I actually just went and covered it that year. I don't remember what year it was, but lesson learned.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm glad I had it on my calendar then and ready to go. Because, with how crazy things are and how busy everyone is, it could literally slip you by. Oh yeah, I'll just do it tomorrow. Yeah. Oh yeah, I have the whole week. I'll do it tomorrow. So yeah, I got it done first thing in the morning.
Another neat thing about Boston is you kind of don't entirely know whether you get in or not. You literally apply, you don't sign up.
Right.
You're asking permission to run a frigging marathon. And you just have to wait to find out whether or not you made the cutoff within the cutoff.
Right.
Which is nerve-wracking but cool. Have you done the math on it? Are you safe? Or do you think you're safe?
I have 28 minutes or 30 minutes.
Okay, you're good. I think you're good.
Okay.
It's usually 5-ish minutes, right?
Okay. Yeah. I do have a bit of a cushion, so I'm happy with that. I hope I can run. I hope they let me run.
I think they'll let you in.
Okay.
You stay with your parents when you when you go back to Boston? Because it's like home turf.
Yeah, I usually do. My brother is only about 2 miles from the fire station, as I think I've mentioned before. So I'll probably figure out. And he's always working the marathon because he's a police officer and he's always like patrol on marathon day. So I'm sure he'll be there too. So yeah, I'll probably end up staying somewhere in Newton and then just got to get that ride out to Hopkinton.
Cool.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
All right. So, Alex, you're back from France. You went up for a little mountain experience. Katelyn and I were curious. Katelyn and I have been side channeling about this without your awareness.
We want to know everything.
How's Chamonix?
I have no idea. It wasn't in Chamonix. It was in Sainte-Foy, which is like a 90-minute, 2-hour ride from Chamonix. But I mean, it's all part of the French Alps, right? So the landscape's probably similar, but like the actual town settlement of Chamonix, I didn't get to see. But it was neat. I don't have much mountain running experience. I thought I did. I ran cross country in college. I thought, hey, you know what?
They're on golf courses, man. Come on.
It's a lot of up and downs. And so I told myself this would be really easy. I kind of went ass backwards into it, to be honest. I'm like now in the middle of my racing season. And a couple days before this opportunity came, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I tweaked my back at the gym. And then the first thought that goes through my mind is, do I really go and gallivant through the mountains while I'm trying to heal a back injury? And then I tell myself, this is like, it's kind of a press trip kind of thing, right? Like they bring people, media members to hang out there, check out this luxury cottage, go on little hikes around the woods in the Alps. I thought, you know what, if nothing else, it'll be easy. It'll be nice therapeutic kind of thing. I show up there, back still kind of hurt. And I realize that the other 3 guests who are there are like professional athletes. And I'm going to be the laggard. I'd be the 4th out of 4. And I quickly noticed that the hills are also, well, I know the Alps are pretty big, but also that there's barely any flat terrain to do my tiny little recovery runs on. Mm-hmm. And so I realized that this is going to be an intense 4-day running and hiking experience. So like I made the most of it. I did a whole lot of hiking and running. It was cool. I got to live at altitude for a few days. I maintained that it helped my race a few days later, the like tiny little red blood cell adaptation that supposedly only comes after a couple of weeks, but I'm convinced that something happened up there. But I don't know. You're going to ask me if I'm like about to convert to the trails. I have my thoughts on this, but yeah, I'm back. I've lived to tell the tale.
We should say we buried the lead here. You made a wonderful vlog, a YouTube video on our channel that came out actually today. We're recording on Wednesday, and it dropped this morning. So if you're listening, you'll be able to watch it. Go to our YouTube channel and give it a watch. And it's basically Alex makes, I guess, 5 mistakes a road runner makes when trying to convert to the trails, which we can talk about a little bit once we get into like the big main segment of what it's like to convert to becoming a trail runner or to embrace trail running as part of your running practice. But yeah, it's a great video, really well shot, by the way, as well. I mean, obviously, like the landscape lends itself so nicely.
Scenery was gorgeous, of course.
Yeah, very, very jealous. And I'm 100% certain I've run all through that little area that you were camped out in, you were based in. And so let's go through that a little bit. Let's do you guys want to pivot to the big segment right away?
Let's do it.
Yeah, and Alex, we can use all your experience. I mean, you're like, you have the freshest information and the best expert right now. So if any other road runner, track runner wants to think about going to the trails, you've got like firsthand experience just last week. So I think it's a great time to do it.
And I'm still not a convert, so I come at it with very sober eyes.
Okay.
He's not convinced that this is the one true way. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about transitioning from, say you're like so many of our listeners, you're somebody who primarily runs on the road. just because you think of yourself as a runner. I mean, you're not thinking like trail runner, ultra trail runner, road runner, track runner, whatever. You're just a runner. You're just somebody who runs in their neighborhood because you love to run and it's easy and accessible. But you probably live in a city or the suburbs. So you're going to have to seek out trails. But it seems like trail people are having a lot of fun on the trail. So let's talk about understanding the transition. And who better talk about this with than Katelyn, who is, do we call you a pro, an expert, an elite ultra runner?
No,
What can we call you all those things?
Let's just say an enthusiast. Is that better? No.
An extreme trail enthusiast.
Okay, yeah, an extreme trail enthusiast. We'll say, well, we can leave it like that. I've got my experience being here in Costa Rica for all these years, and okay. So let's think about the transition. Let's think about the differences between trail running and road running. Of course, as Michael just said, you got to find the trail. So that's kind of like always the first challenge. You got to figure out where you're going to go, which it turns into really a trail runner will end up running a lot on the road during the week, unless you're a professional and you live in a place where you can be on the trails every day. So you usually think about planning your weekend runs, like your long runs on the trails. You have to find trails. You have to deal with, obviously, we'll hear from Alex, uphills, downhills, altitude, like obstacles on the course, depending on how technical the trail is going to be, right? You may need to invest in a little bit more gear, which we'll get to in a little bit, because you might need some extra things, which is fun. And thinking about changing your mentality about running. Because if you're a serious road runner and you're thinking about, pace, and speed, you got to change your mentality a little bit, which we'll get into, because you're going to be running depending on the trails. If you live where I live and you go to the trails, it's literally up or down, which I think Alex pretty much saw in the Alps. It's up or down. So you've got to make some big decisions about, kind of taking pace a little less seriously and that sort of thing. So I think when thinking about transitioning, those are the main things that you're going to run into when you're first making that change. Did you experience what else do you think, Alex? Those things plus what?
Well, yeah, those are the main things. I mean, the thing that really hits home for me is that before doing these trails, I thought that there was a competition inside of running, right? Like road runners thought that trail runners just were not fast and that it was kind of a weak version of road running, and that trail runners didn't really understand road running because it's not that exciting. You're just running as hard as you can, looking at the same thing. And so there was a bit of like kind of fake animosity, but like just a little bit of comparison on both sides. And after this, I realized that there's no point of it because it's a different sport, which I think attracts different types. I think there is that pipeline of like you start as a cross country runner in college, then you do road racing, and then you do trail. Like those people do exist, but I think they're few and far between. The best trail runners, many of the best trail runners are from the trails. They're from the mountains. They started when they were young because that was the community around them. Much like many people who live in the city, like myself, don't seek out the trails because that's not where the community is right in front of them. It's people run on the roads. So I think those are two different sports. I think there's two different temperaments to an extent. Like I needed to change my mentality about exercise in general. One outing for a trail run could be like 5-6 hours. And it wouldn't be uncommon for the trail runners that I was with after like the 4th hour being like, oh, look at this peak. Oh, let's go climb this peak. And then they went. And I was like, well, isn't this over? Like, when is it? When's it gonna end?
It's a lot of time. It's not a 1500, right? It's like
No. And that's what I'm used to, right? It's like a short, even a 10K is short in comparison. It's like a really focused little window of time where you're giving it your all, and after that you go have a beer. Like it's quick, whereas trail running, it's like a full day experience. Yeah, that's the main thing. Change your mindset going into it.
Yeah,
I would say that with like particularly with track and road, when you're looking, your goals are typically distance based or event based goals. So you're thinking like, I'm going to run a half marathon, I'm going to run a 1500 meters on the track, I'm running a 5K. And then you start thinking about the secondary motivator would be probably a time-based goal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to run it in this amount of time. And then it becomes very much about control and very much about being super focused in structuring your training around that end goal, which is really smart. And it's very methodical. It's very purpose-based. Obviously, on the trails, particularly if you're doing something like Alex just did, where you hit the French Alps for a few days and it's kind of unstructured and there's no real you're not running UTMB or whatever. So you're not thinking about a specific distance or a specific course and you're not training for that in particular. It just sort of turns into like time-based probably versus distance-based, or maybe it's project-based where it's like, let's go run this peak today, that sort of thing. And it becomes kind of more fluid, less about whether or not you're doing too much or too little, and more instead about like, let's see if we can get this thing done. What's your thinking on that, Katelyn? I mean, you're somebody who's like trained in a very structured way on the trails.
Yeah, I think I think that there are different, ways to look at it in different groups of people. Those who are just going to go out and have a nice ride, like go and run and explore and like an adventure. But I think most of us, or at least all the trail runners that I train here, they're planning on a specific race. And so it is extremely structured. The training is just like you're going to have in a marathon training plan, as in the structure. However, the components are going to be different and the parameters are going to be different. So you just mentioned about, you're usually thinking about time and usually thinking about pace and how much time you're going to take to run like a 5K or 10K. So if I'm training for a 50K and I know, and I research that 50K and I say, okay, the terrain's going to be like this. There's always going to be surprises, but you can do the best you can. The terrain's going to be like this. It's going to be 4,000 meters of vertical gain, like something crazy. Okay, so what am I going to do? I'm going to train my runners when they're long runs, time-based and not distance-based for two reasons. One, because a 20-kilometer run with, 100 meters of gain is going to take a lot less time than a 20-kilometer run with 2,000 meters of gain or something crazy like that. So you start thinking in time, like you said, Michael, but you can really get into the nitty gritty of it and actually prescribe long runs with time plus elevation. So for example, I would say to someone, if they're going to be doing, a vertical kilometer, or they're going to be doing an ultra that has a lot of vertical gain, I'm going to say, okay, do this long run for this week at this many hours with this much vertical gain. So people have to actually go and find routes where they're going to be able to accumulate that kind of vertical gain. So it can get pretty specific. It just, the specificities are very different things than when you're doing road running.
Right. So it would be like, the difference would be like, if you're doing a long run and you're targeting a marathon and you're saying to yourself, I need to do 20 miles and I want to do 7 miles at marathon pace. That's all sort of keeping in mind that you're probably going to be, especially if you're running a flatter course, like Chicago is an example, a very flat course, not a Boston. You're probably just thinking in terms of like trying to keep it flat and hit that pace,
right,
so that you can check that box off and build that confidence and also feel like you've sort of like built that system in your body as well. Whereas with trail running in particular, or longer distance trail running, it's more about like time bucket, and then also kind of like equivalent like elevation profile.
Right. And terrain, if you can find something similar to the race, of course, that's awesome. We've got a big group, about 25 of our runners going to Kodiak, which is in just a month. It's a UTMB race and it's in California. And these long runs are our peak runs this month, right? So we also, as trail runners, ultra trail runners, we do these like the back-to-backs, right? So you don't run this like crazy distance on one day. You'll split it up into 2 days. So like, for example, this weekend, for the people running 100K and 100 miles, they've got around like 3 hours one day and then 5 hours the next day. And we're looking for routes with similar vertical gain, like a similar average vertical gain for that racing Kodiak. So they're practicing about the same sort of incline so they can really get a feel for it before the race. So yeah, instead of pace, we look for things like terrain and vertical gain.
I learned that vertical gain is a big way to measure runs and talk about runs. Just like we would be like, went for 10 miles. When I finished one of the hikes, one of the other athletes was like, yeah, wow, we went for 600. And I was so dead at that point. I'm like, 600 what? Minutes? And they're like, no, vertical meters. I was like, oh, cool. So the lingo also changes.
Yeah, you know what, Alex? It's so funny because we do the same thing here to kind of translate it into road running kilometers. So, for example, I actually thought about this before we got on the pod, and I thought, okay, on Saturday, because as you can say, oh, trail runners, they seem so slow. Because if you look at my Strava, you look at my long run on Saturday, you're going to say, okay, Katelyn, you ran 4 hours, you ran 34 kilometers. Okay, yes, but I ran 34 kilometers plus more than 1,300 meters of vertical gain. So we take that 1,300 meters and we add 13 kilometers. So we would say, okay, so you ran 47 kilometers in 4 hours. So now it doesn't look as, okay, so I did 47 kilometers easy run, thinking of it as an easy run on the road. And so that's kind of how you do that conversion. And when you see the gap paces in Strava, it really does make sense. So look at it like that. So you think, oh, okay, I went about, running at 5, whatever, a kilometer instead of, 650 or whatever it came out of on Garmin Connect. So that's kind of how we measure it to get in, to kind of put it in street running words, road running words.
So that's, and now I understand why you wake up at 3 a.m. Cool.
There you go.
Because it takes her forever to do a long run.
Exactly.
So that's your little hack is like,
yep.
you go distance you've covered, and then you take how much vertical gain, how much elevation gain you've achieved in the run in meters, and 1,000 meters equals an extra, no, 100.
100, yeah, 100.
100 meters equals an extra kilometer.
Yep, you got it.
Awesome. Okay. I mean, that's a useful metric,
right?
It's probably not like 100% accurate, but
no.
like, cause it might be exponential, but
right.
At the same time, it just kind of gives you a nice ballpark. And then you can probably do the math on that and be like, oh, okay. Like I ended up running my long run at this pace theoretically if I were running on the roads.
Exactly. And I like to see that number too, because I like to kind of translate it into that and say, okay, well, on the road, it would have been 47 kilometers in the 4 hours instead. So I kind of just, take a look at that. And I also use that to help my athletes understand like how much they're really doing. Because when they say, how about I only ran, 14 kilometers in 2 hours? Yeah, but how much vertical gain did you have? Okay, let's hash it out and let's see what you really did.
Yeah, I did a trail run. What day are we today? I did a trail run on Monday. I'll have to go back and look at it. It was like 14 kilometers, but it took me quite a bit of while, and there's quite a bit of vertical gain. I'll have to do the math on it.
Yeah.
I'll probably feel a lot better about it afterwards. Like, oh,
you will.
It's an 18 kilometer run at whatever pace.
Exactly.
Okay, that's cool. And that's very useful because I think one of the anxieties that those of us who are predominantly road racers feel when it comes to switching to the trail for a certain amount of your running, it's sort of like there's an uncertainty and there's a fear that you're not doing enough, or maybe that you're doing too much, right? It's difficult to do that equation. That's a really solid equation. Very useful, Katelyn.
Great.
I'm great takeaway.
I'm about to add 50K to my Strava from last week. That's great.
There you go.
We're going to see this like extra. It's going to say like, a manual input activity from Alex, 50K.
Vertical. You're working harder than usual. Yes, I was.
Just tack that on. So, obviously I just made a little list of like what I see as the big differences are, and we've touched on pretty much all of them. Overall pace is going to be quite different. Effort level is going to be a very different experience, as Alex has noted already. And recovery is actually, I think, a bit of a different experience as well. I find I tend to recover more quickly when I'm from trail running than I do from straight road running. And obviously the terrain challenges are a huge factor. You use different muscle groups, Katelyn.
You sure do. Going uphill, down. Well, Alex can tell us about his quads from pounding the downhills. I mean,
yeah. Can you tell I'm sitting down right now? No. Actually, I did feel a big difference. And I texted my coach, John, about this morning because he was almost skeptical, I think, of the amount of DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, that I reported from being in the Alps for a couple days. But to me, it was more so the downhills. Now, I have a hockey playing background from way back, but I kept playing over the years. And so when it comes to like quad dominant things, or at least uphills, I'm pretty good. The downhills were difficult. I would have to go back to my physiology textbook here, but maybe I'm using my muscles a little bit differently, or if it's flexing versus extending. Anyway, my quad muscles got shredded on the downhills after a few days of just walking, right? I didn't do much running downhill. It was even to the point where when the other athletes would run downhill, sometimes I would choose to walk because I was starting to have pains there and I didn't want to overdo it. And so that's it. If you're a runner going to trails for the first time, don't completely bomb the downhills for a few days in a row. Like really ease into that. Even if the first day feels easy, that'll probably catch up to you on day 2.
Yeah, and that's why strength training is like number one for trail runners, because when I go to a trail race, that's where I can pull ahead in a trail race are the downhills. That's where you make up the most distance. That's where a very wise trail runner here, like over a decade ago, said to me, Katelyn, you win trail races in the downhills, because if you can just pound the downhills, the uphills, you can be fast and you can have a strong hike or a nice run going up the hills, but it's harder to make up more time uphill than it is downhill. So that's why we focus so much on strength training, because you've got your quads to be super strong, so when you do pound the downhills, your quads can take it. So I absolutely agree. For a beginner, be really careful on those downhills, and it's really fun because you're kind of like, wee, I'm going downhill and I get to go super fast. You were not.
Wee.
and on the uphills, glutes, hamstrings if you're walking, if you're power hiking or power walking, and then calves if you're running uphill. So like Michael said, you're working all these different muscle groups, which is great because it's an all-around workout for all the parts of your legs, all the muscle groups, but it's really tough on you if you're not used to that and you're used to just running flat road. It's going to be a big change, and you're really going to feel it, like you mentioned to us.
I mean, we don't need to do like gym corner here, but just really give us a quickly snapshot as to like what your approach is in terms of strength training. Like, are we talking, do you do a couple times a week, 3 times a week? Are you going into the gym? Are you lifting? Do you have like a routine you do? What's the time investment you're putting in? Like what's the difference for a trail runner in terms of time doing strength and conditioning?
Okay. Yeah. And I wouldn't say that it's exaggerated either. I only go twice a week. I just make sure that those workouts are the one that's earlier in the week, that's furthest from my long run, is going to be more leg dominant. So it's going to be pretty much a leg day with some other core stuff in it. And then the second day a week, it's going to be a full body workout as well, also focusing on a lot of core. But since, I feel like trail running in general, but, even for good posture, you need to do some upper body stuff. So I like the back stuff in there and stuff, biceps is not as important, but, talking about like back stuff for posture, core, legs. And thinking about like the types, even though there are phases, just like there are phases in a running program, like you've got your strength, you've got your power, you've got your resistance. I tend to suggest doing like more high weight, low reps, because you're doing a lot of resistance training we're doing it in our running anyway. So it's kind of to take advantage of the time, you can do like for that powerful lifts, you can do 8 reps with, a weight that's going to be tricky for you to get through rep 7 and 8 and, 3 sets or something like that. Like just an overview. And then I do switch it up. And then sometimes I'm doing, less weight, 10 to 12 reps of stuff. And yeah, at the gym, lifting weights, you can do most of the stuff without machines. Actually, working without machines is even better, because we have to think that when we're trail running, stability is so important, and agility. So if you're working with dumbbells and you're working with kettlebells, and you're not working with a machine at the gym that is actually going to help you, right? Because it's going to stabilize your body when you're lifting the weights. So doing a lot of like functional training, as they call it, with dumbbells and kettlebell, free weights, to say it like that, even barbells and that sort of thing, is going to be better for you, because you're also going to work on your balance and on your stability and that sort of thing, which is going to help you on the trails.
I think we actually have some video work of you doing some of these strength training stuff on the site. Look at this. Look at this segue. I didn't even mean to do this. This is not in the show notes, but I will put it in the podcast show notes, that a link to you doing some of these exercises for our listeners to slot that in. I think even if you're not a trail runner, probably a good idea. I think it's like the number one thing that goes by the wayside for the vast majority of us. I'm definitely guilty of this as well. I always tell myself every week, like 2 times this week, you got to do something strength and conditioning based. Even if you're just like BSing your way through it, just committing to doing it, you'll gain some benefit from it. I think the main differentiator for me for trail running versus road running, because I do a fair amount of running on the trail and fair amount of running in the sort of like city trails, and I think that that's something that if you live in a city or a suburb, a satellite of a city, and certainly if you live in a rural area, there's got to be some sort of trail network out there that you can find, and I think it's a lot of fun if you don't want to just become like a full on dyed in the wool trail runner. I think there's still huge benefit, both physical and psychological, for hitting the trails a few times a week. And this is I'm talking to you, Alex, here. I'm talking to my younger self, and I'm talking to you, which is to let go a little bit of being super focused on pace, and particularly on easy run day and just running on time and hitting the trail. You develop quite a bit more overall strength and lateral stability.
Right.
But also, I think the big difference for me between the trail and the road is the fact that your mind is totally engaged in a run when you're running on the trail versus on the road. On the road, you don't really think very much about where you're placing your feet, about what's in front of you, beyond just like, is that a stoplight? Is the stoplight red? Am I going to get run over by a car? Right? Like you don't think beyond that, right? And especially if you're out running with somebody else. Whereas on the trail, you're very, very present, to use a buzzword of the last few years, an Instagram friendly term. You're super present. And I think that's a reason why people like to run, right? They like to get into their own headspace, be very present with what they're doing, very conscious and self-aware, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Whoa.
Wow. We're good. Alex, how did you find,
let's do this.
How did you find the trails? How did you find like the technicality of the trails where you were? Were they groomed, or were they tricky? Lots of rocks and roots, or how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, it was fine. I feel like over the course of this podcast, I've come across as like a road absolutist. I'm not. I do road races. I don't do trail races. But in the past, especially when I get to higher mileage, I go on the trails. Those city trails, the same thing. Because of exactly that. Running on the road, the same road all the time, gets boring. You want to keep it interesting. So in terms of like the routes, I mean, there were two levels of this. Like when you actually got on the hiking trails, like you were negotiating with rocks, that's when, like, because I wasn't that experienced of a trail runner, I was walking. Okay. I also probably didn't quite have shoes that were technical enough to really negotiate rocks and run on them. So I didn't even mess with that. But when it comes to trails that most people can find with tree roots and stuff, I think that if you're careful and you try to avoid rolling an ankle, it's good. It is a strength workout.
Yeah. Without
you realizing the uphills and the downhills, placing your foot on the ground slightly differently every time makes a huge difference. And I think it's good to pepper in for the mental and the physical. I won't throw as many qualifiers as Michael, but hey, it is a good change.
Yeah, I think that exactly that. Placing your foot differently each time, running on different terrain, it's a little softer. And there are a lot of studies out there that actually have found that a lot less impact than running on the road, right? So I have one of my athletes had a stress fracture in her foot a while ago, and she's, we're rehabilitating and, getting her back to a ton of running. And she was running a lot of road. And last week, she went and she was on vacation and running on some trails. And she said, wow, I feel a lot better. And I was like, yeah, of course, because, you're placing your feet differently. You're running on softer terrain. You've got to go up a little bit. You've got to go down a little bit. And she really loved it and thought, well, this is going to be great to have a little bit less impact. If you don't have to run trail every day, but if you can just take out that little percentage of impact, then pounding the pavement every day, it'll be a real big help.
I realized many years ago that, first of all, if you're running on a paved trail, which is a ridiculous thing, but it's extremely common when you live in a city, you just slap some asphalt down on a perfectly good, packed dirt trail. It's like, I guess that makes it more useful if you're biking. It's more useful as a multi-use trail. Mm-hmm. But I just run next to it. I run next to it in on the grass or on the dirt, And it's just these like little micro differences in the surface that you don't get on smooth tarmac
Right.
that I think over time definitely help, right? It's
Yeah.
because otherwise you're really flirting with the potential for repetitive stress injuries.
Right.
I think road running, it's just you're repeating the same thing over and over and over again, particularly if you are leaning to more towards running on sort of like flat surfaces a lot, or perhaps consciously or not avoiding going up and down hills and varying terrain. I think it's a good idea to kind of get off the road a little bit, even if you are focusing on the road. Although I will say another pro tip would be if you are ultimately running road races as a goal race, and you'll talk to anybody talk to the best runners from East Africa, talk to Eliud Kipchoge. He's a guy who's like he's training mostly on dirt roads
Mm-hmm.
and on a dirt track, but they purposefully move to tarmac as the season progresses in order to get that pounding in, so that when they run the grand finale, the big race, the marathon, it's not a like a devastating, damaging experience for their bodies. So that's, I think, something to keep in mind is like if you're 100% on the trails and then you move to the road for the race, it can be kind of a painful experience. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, like, why make the switch, Katelyn? I mean, everyone's like listening here. We're 35 minutes into this podcast. We're talking about the the virtues of trail running. If you're listening to this and you mostly run on the road and you're like, I don't know where the trails are in my city or town,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds kind of cool. It seems really neat. It'd be nice to run in the mountains one day on a vacation, but like ultimately that's not something that's going to happen in the near future for me. Like, what's the impetus to move to the trail? Why did you move to the trail? I guess maybe you moved to the trail because you live in Costa Rica and there's
Yeah,
trails everywhere.
I actually started running on the trails, and it's
Oh
actually
yeah.
yeah, and it's actually funny because I was here. At first, I was living out by the beach, and so even though it wasn't a ton of trail, it was still a lot of hills, and it was beach running or paths next to the beach. So a lot of trail running, a lot of hills in general, because it's really hard to find flat ground here. It's really, really hard. You have to go like in the center of some towns, and you've just got maybe like a 5K loop that you've got to go over and over again to get a lot of flat ground. And so I started out on the trails more than anything. And I just really, just a bunch of things that you guys were saying, like the experience and being really present with running is cool. But the community is very fun. And I think, Michael, you mentioned that as well. The trail community is very fun, and it's super fun to go exploring new places and to meet new people. And a lot of trail running, yes, of course, are always going to be levels. And when you're training for trail running to compete, it's not always going to be just like going out on an adventure. But I have to be honest, a lot of my long runs or like chatting with my running partner or with other people in the running group or with people around me, even in a super long, if it's an ultra race. Of course, if it's a short trail race and you're competing, it's not going to be like that, but the training aspect of it, you can usually find a really great community and a lot of fun people, experienced people as well, who you can go running with. And it's just kind of a nice change because you're not thinking about pace, you're not thinking about speed, you're not thinking about, I love both. I'm a total hybrid runner, and you guys both know it because I just did a road marathon in May. Now I'm going to do an ultra in October, and then I'm hoping to run Boston in April. So I'm like a super hybrid runner, and I go back and forth, and I really enjoy both. But I do enjoy trail running more, and I think because it takes a little bit of the pressure off of the paces. So I come off of training for a marathon where I've like really been just like working myself into the ground and just trying to hit pace after pace after pace. And for me, it can get a little bit on the stressful side because I put a lot of pressure on myself. When I'm in the trails, I could be running, even practicing at that same effort level. But since I'm not looking quite so hard at the numbers and I'm working more on my effort level and just kind of like enjoying what's around me, even though I'm working hard, I think that that's a big, that's a really big plus for trail running. So maybe even if you are a road runner, you could add a day or two in during the week because it's going to take off some impact for you, early in the season, less specific training to more specific training. You get closer to the marathon, focus on the roads. So if you want to add it in just to switch it up a little bit, have some fun, explore, have a little less impact. Or if you want, you can do similar to what I do and do a road running season, an off season, a trail running season, and kind of take like that pressure off and that stress off And I don't know, you guys maybe don't feel stress when you're trying to hit paces and stuff, but I sure do. So I feel like it's like a nice breather. It can be like a nice escape maybe for road runners.
I feel stress in the opposite way. And I think I know why. So 3 weeks ago, I took a personality test. This had nothing to do with the Alps.
I need to hear this.
Your INTP or whatever.
Exactly that. Yeah. I think it's a
Myers-Briggs.
The Myers-Briggs personality test. And essentially what they do is they ask you a bunch of questions. You answer like 50 or 60 questions, and then they map out your response to rank you in 7 or 8 different categories. One of the categories stuck out to me when I was thinking about road running versus trail running. It's this category they called the judge or the prospector. Now, a judge, it's not about judging people. It's not that. The judge is kind of like judging your day. The judge does well when they wake up and they know what their day is going to be about. They have measured goals. They have outcomes that they want to hit. The prospector is somewhat the opposite. They thrive in a little bit more chaos. They're happier, they feel more like themselves when they don't necessarily know what the day's about to bring. They like having a lot of free time. That means I can work on whatever I want to, and then I'll have my best results that way. Can you guys guess what I was? A judge or a prospector?
Judge?
Are you going digging for gold? Are you a prospector?
You seen the old Prospector Saturday Night Live clip with Will Ferrell? Anyway, I was a judge.
Yes.
I was a judge.
Yeah.
100%.
I was a judge. And I think most judges who run find themselves in road running because the outcomes are a lot more decided, or at least you know what you're going for. And the prospectors might find themselves in trail running. So you're asking anxieties. I don't really have anxiety. It's about pace and time because I know that that's the goal. I kind of thrive under that because it's like if I want to run, 15 minutes for 5K, I've done all these workouts and now I'm going to do it. It's like all part of the plan. My fear, anxiety comes from like, what's the meaning of this? What's the purpose of this? Why am I doing this trail run? What am I getting out of it? It's less anxiety, but more of a like confusion, maybe.
Okay.
So Katelyn, I actually think that you're an anomaly in doing this, in being like someone who's crossed the aisle and now dabbles in both. I think most people, once they cross the aisle, they either say, oh, this is for me, or no, it's not, going back. Are you a judge or a prospector? Because I think you're a judge.
You're absolutely right. I think I'm a judge too, Alex. I totally do, because I'm super structured. I love it when I finish a workout and I'm like, yeah, look at these splits. I hit every pace. Like, I do love that part. But then sometimes I do like to take that off because I put too much pressure on myself. So the trail running is just like, I'm going to go out, I'm going to have a great time. And it's not that I'm not going to run hard. I'll run hard as well and I'll train hard, but I just feel like it's like liberating. I don't know. I love being out there on the trails. It's just this great change of scene. You never know what you're going to run into. And I don't know, just a different atmosphere, I guess.
And Michael, you're a prospector.
Yeah. I know exactly what I am because I did one of these tests. I think I did it with a place I worked at many years ago.
Pull up the results.
I am an INTP. I am a prospector through and through. I love me nothing more than a day of uncertainty and wandering.
Oh.
And I'm definitely, Katelyn, I'm definitely the type that like, get me on the trail for 5 or 6 hours. Yeah, I'll go up and explore that peak over there and see what happens.
That's awesome.
The danger for me is getting to the peak and then I'm like, this has totally happened to me before in the Canadian Rockies, where it's like running outside of the town of Jasper, and then I'm like, oh, the sun's going down.
Oh my God.
I've been out on the trails running for 5 hours. Oh yeah, it gets a little darker here than it does in town because there's no street lights in the wilderness. Maybe I should run a little bit faster right now. And it gets you in a little bit of trouble. What was it? What initialism personality type did you get there, Alex? Do you know?
ENTJ. I'm something called a commander.
The commander. I like it.
That's it. That's his new name.
Can we call you
the
Commander Cyr?
Commander.
Please don't. You can if you want.
Commander Cyr.
I love it.
I like it.
I'm going to take the test. So next time I'll have my results.
There's got to be like a million. There's got to be a million of them online that you can take, right? So,
but the thing about, I will say the thing about these, the Myers-Briggs test is the one that people seem to know about. So that probably says something. Like you had done it, Michael. It's a friend who gave it to me, and then when I mentioned to other people, they already seem to have their results. So I don't know.
I'm gonna do it.
I think it's a thing everyone goes through at a certain point in life, like kind of late 20s. You've started your career, or you start sort of thinking about who you are more introspectively. Especially like I think this runners in particular, you spend a lot of time in your own head, a lot of time thinking about your life, a lot of existential grand questions at this point in your life. And these sorts of things you find yourself doing. I think in my case, it was like a professional thing. I think they offered it a firm I worked at. And because it can kind of help you with like guiding your decision making in your career and that sort of thing. It's also got a little bit of a horoscope vibe to it, where it's kind of like you read the qualities, and then you sort of like, project those qualities on yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So, because we could all think of ourselves as judges and prospectors to a certain degree.
Also a Leo.
Let's share signs.
He's totally a Leo.
Oh, I got to look up Leo. I'm a Pisces, Michael.
Gemini, Cancer cusp.
We're doing this.
Oh yeah, let's go.
We got to do a deep dive in this. All right.
So what I do, I'm born on the summer solstice. So I just read both, and I'm like, I like that one today. I'm going to go with that one. Anyway, let's move back to the trails here. Right. Let's talk a little bit about, we don't have to go down the gear pipeline here because there's just so much gear stuff to talk about. But I think that one thing that comes to mind for me when I think about trail running, particularly when I think about ultra trail running, which are two very different things to a certain degree. Like one's a subdomain of the other. I think about gear, and I think about the little backpacks. I think about different gel brands road runners have never heard of. It's like, I know what Goo is. I know what Morton is, but I know what Honey Stinger is. But like, what's this other weird, organic, vegan, gigantic, it's like, it looks like baby food. What the hell are you guys eating? Solids, because in some ultras, like, you're on your feet so long, you're like, yeah, I'll have a burger. Why the heck not? Oh, no. And I got a funny ultra running burger story I can share with you guys in a second. But like basically, and then there's obviously shoes. Alex and I love talking about shoes. We won't nerd out too much about shoes. There's a time and a place for that. It can be boring. But like ultimately, say Katelyn, say one were to run 50K or 100K in November-ish, in a UTMB event somewhere in Asia, what would they need?
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
What would they need to wear to have success in that event in Hong Kong, for example?
Are you asking for a friend, Michael?
I'm asking for a friend.
Okay. All right. If you're
Who happens to be a Gemini Cancer.
If you're asking for a friend, you can tell your friend, because I think this friend prefers to be a little, like, not to have so much cushioning in their shoes, because you can always go down the Hoka rabbit hole. I do not use as much Hoka as other brands, but I do have a couple pairs of Hoka. I used for many years a Sportiva, but they are a very kind of like a hard shoe, because when I'm running, I really like to feel the ground beneath me. So when I'm running on trail, right? So running on trail, I like to have a lot of control over my footing. And so most of the shoes that I've used or that I use on technical trails, they've been the Sportiva, which they have, the Caracal, and they've got the Jackal, and they've got, what other ones have I used there? And now I have switched over. I've also been using Brooks, because Brooks aren't.
Get out.
Yeah. I love the Cascadia, and they were actually one of my first trail shoes way back in the day. And I just got them again. I like the minor changes that they've made to it with a wider toe box and such. And for this race I'm going to run in October, I'm going to use the Divide And I know that sounds a little crazy. The Divide is like a hybrid shoe. It's like
Okay.
trail, road, and it's a very light, comfortable shoe. And I wore it when I ran Black Canyon a couple of years ago and loved it. It seems like a pretty fast shoe in terms of just like being light and comfortable. And I don't like all that cushioning on the trail because I feel like what happens is I easily trip over a rock or it hits, all this extra material on the bottom of the shoe. I just feel like awkward, like clunky sometimes. So those are the shoes that I've been using most recently that I've liked a lot. So even though, Brooks is like that road running shoe, they've got amazing trail shoes. So you should check them out. I mean, your friend.
No, my friend. Yes.
Yeah, your friend.
I will pass it on to them.
Please do.
Rock plate. That's something that you see in certain trail shoes, but not others. When do you think rock plate versus not? I guess it really depends on like the terrain of the trail you're running on predominantly.
Yeah, I think the Sportiva, a lot of those, I think a lot of Sportiva shoes have rock plates in them, at least a couple that I've used there as far as I can remember. So I think, you've really got to think about, so to ask your friend what the terrain is going to be on the race. And then I think that you can really kind of pick and choose the shoes thinking about the terrain, because it's going to be super technical where you're going to want a lot of grip, like where you might run into a lot of like slippery stuff. Or is it going to be something a little more nice groomed trails, like where I would choose something like the Divide, because I'm not going to need like these, super, or maybe I'm mistaken and it's going to be tougher than I think. But the Divide, I feel like can like run on a little bit more runnable trails than something that's like super technical. So I don't know, Alex, you're going to have to do some serious research for us about trail shoes and give us the best ones.
Yeah, well, what I would tell your friend is that your friend shouldn't make the common roadrunner mistake of just like taking your road running shoe, but the Virgin that's like GTX and slap a slab of Vibram underneath the Vibram grip and expect that that's going to be sufficient. The ones that I used were just a lot bulkier. What I would say is like, don't be afraid to look at brands that maybe you've never used or never tried. Like I think of the one that Katelyn mentioned. I think of Scarpa, that's pretty popular in Europe. I think of Scott, another shoe brand.
Scott. Mm-hmm.
That like, it doesn't have to be Nike or Adidas, right? Adidas has like their Terex, I think,
Terex,
line that also is pretty prominent in the trail space. But yeah, don't be afraid to try out shoes that maybe you've never tried before from other brands, because some trail brands do it better than predominantly road brands.
I'll give a quick shout out to a Canadian brand, to a Quebecois brand, Norda, which Katelyn, you and I have talked about Norda before. They have sort of come on the scene and filled what they saw as a gap in the trail shoe category, and have done a pretty good job with it. They're really expensive, but they're interesting.
And they're supposed to last a really long time. That's kind of like one of the reasons for the price point, they say.
Yeah. And of course there's Solomon and so on and so forth. I have a really old pair of Solomon Lab Sense. So kind of like Kilian Jornet's racing shoe back when he was with them. And I find they're good up to about 40, but good up to about like kind of like 3 or 4 hours on the trail. Mm-hmm. And then my feet just start to feel the ground a bit too much, depending on. Yeah. All right. Little backpacks. At what distance do you put on the little vest? I guess it's when it gets too annoying to carry stuff in pockets on your shorts. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm not a big fan of carrying a handheld water bottle. It's just uncomfortable for me. My arms get tired. So I just prefer the backpack. So there are some races where there are going to be aid stations very close together. So that's also kind of a thing. Like obviously on the long runs, you might not have help. So you're probably going to have to carry stuff in the backpack. In races, check out where the aid stations are going to be. And also make sure you always check out the gear that they're going to be checking off, and make sure that you have, because some races make you wear, or you have to carry 1.5 liters of water at least, or you have to carry a vest, or you have to carry, a certain amount of items. But yeah, I basically use the backpack on any of my runs that are going to be longer than, 1.5 hours or a couple of hours, because I need to hydrate a lot. And so I can't just, carry stuff in a belt or in the shorts or anything like that. So, and they're pretty comfortable. And now, there's so much technology. Ultimate Direction makes some super lightweight ones. And they literally have, some vests that are called Race that are going to be extremely light. and they're going to be very minimalistic. So you just basically get your water bladder in there, your hydration bladder in there, and they have a couple pockets. And they have, up until like mountain vests where they're still extremely light, but they just have a lot more pockets on them. So you just want to make sure that you have something simple that you can stay hydrated and have your nutrition on you, and that you're just not going to run. I wanted to ask you, Michael, when you mentioned that about going the 5 hours up the peak and then had to get down because of the sun. When the sun was going down, did you have nutrition on you?
Oh, I think
did you bring stuff?
This is the prospector in me. I probably had like a gel in the back pocket of my like, road racing short shorts, my split shorts. I'd probably long since devoured that. Yeah. I think I may have brought a collapsible water bottle. This would be something that I would recommend anyone grab, particularly if they have a bit of anxiety about hydration when on the trail. Definitely if you're going for like, I'd say over 90 minutes or 2 hours, you don't have to carry one of these, like when you imagine water bottle, you imagine like a hard plastic or a squeezy plastic water bottle. You can get ones made by a couple of different brands. Life Straw, I think, is the one that I have, which is basically it's just like a collapsible water bottle that you can like crush up into nothing, and you can actually even like put it in your pocket afterwards. Mm-hmm. But it will like balloon out to either like 200, 300, 500 milliliters. So you can, and some of them, like the one I have, actually has like a charcoal filter in it. So they're not cheap. They're like 40 or $50 at an outdoor store, but basically you can grab lake water or stream water, and then it's got a charcoal filter, and you can actually just drink water from it directly from any water source.
Wow,
much.
That's really cool.
Which is there's a pro tip, a hack.
Yeah,
it's sort of like a safety thing, a quasi safety thing as well, right? And I like you, I hate carrying a handheld.
Can't stand it.
I don't like having stuff in my hands when I'm running. I like to have just like full access to everything. Like I like just to work on the stride. So having a little collapsible water bottle is always useful. Trekking poles, hiking poles. You see, like, again, this is one of these things with like YouTube videos. You see like sections of the big ultras, and you see them like whip out the poles, and they're like doing when do you use that? When is that actually something that you implement? Do you have a set of poles sitting in the corner?
I do, and they really sit in the corner. And I know that they could probably help me in some of the races, but I don't really love running with poles. The only time I'll use poles is if really it's going to be a ton of climbing, and I think it's going to be worth it. Because you can fold them up and put them. They're always these little straps in the backpack. But I rarely ever use them for a race. I would rather just, I don't know, work those legs and make those legs work a little harder. But I have used them in vertical kilometer races, which are, just an uphill race where you're going to go 1,000 meters of vertical gain in the shortest amount of distance possible. So in an uphill short race, I'll use them because I know that I won't need to put them away, and I know that I won't need to, right? I'll just use them for the entire race because it's going to be this like crazy mix between power hike and running as fast as I can uphill. And then, so that I feel that they're helpful. But you see a lot of the elites using them all the time, pulling them out, putting them back away, pulling them out. So, I mean, they've got to have a lot of value to them. I think if you know how to use them correctly, then I think that they can be a real asset to your running. But yeah, I'm not a big pole person. I don't use them that often when I run.
I used them in the Alps.
You did?
Because yes, I did. They were like canes more so.
Old man Cyr, the commander's coming down off the mountain.
Double canes. I was with there were two guides, the fast guide and the slow guide, and the fast guide went with the others, and I was with the slow guide, caning it up in the back. It's good if your quads aren't doing it anymore, pull out the poles.
That's true.
That's amazing. There's nothing more fun than going and buying neat new gear and having an excuse for it. So, we're not saying you don't need poles. Maybe poles are a good idea. Yeah. It's like a real flex when you go into the REI or whatever, and you're like, where are your, I need some trekking. I need some running. I need some mountain running poles. Now, not just trekking poles.
Right.
I need the fast ones.
And make sure they're collapsible.
I need the collapsible ultralight ones.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it is.
I'm going to buy some and then bring them to my next 5K and see what people say.
Oh my God.
Next road 5K, you go out in like 3-minute kilometer pace with the poles.
I'll get to the start line and then I'll like flip them out.
Oh no.
I'm ready. All right. So a couple other things. Good light headlamp.
Mm-hmm.
Probably essential, especially if you're going to do, I mean, this is another neat thing. It's, it's one thing to go out and do a run after dark on the road. Totally different ball game hitting a trail in the darkness.
Oh yeah.
Probably a risky endeavor, but also kind of fun. And one of these things that like, you only live once, right? And this is the kind of stuff that can make running feel like a little bit more of an adventure and a little bit less of a chore. So yeah, I think it'd be a cool project to go do a night run with a headlamp on the local trail somewhere. People think you're a lunatic running up in the on the city trails at 10 o'clock at night.
No, but I think running at night, I don't know about you guys, but the best thing about running in the dark is that you really can't tell the gradient of the hill. And so it kind of like messes with your mind and you don't really realize the hills that you're running when you're running at night. I don't know. It helps me like in ultra races and stuff. Then the nighttime span goes by really fast for me. Like that nighttime track goes by really fast for me. I don't know why. I think it has to do with that.
Do we need to buy a new watch?
No.
What do you use? What's your watch?
I use a Garmin. I have the Garmin Fenix 7 and I love it because it's got, especially because I think an important point that we should mention and talking about watches is how to find trails and how to stay on track, right? Because it could be a lot easier to get lost if you're not in a park where there are things that are, here we're always putting the routes together on Strava, on All Trails, on Wikiloc, on one of those apps. And then it's great because what you can do is you can upload that trail onto the Garmin and onto a ton of watches, I'm sure. And you literally have like Google Maps, like step-by-step instructions. So it'll say in 50 meters, take a right. And so it's wonderful if they're using them, those GPX files now for a lot of races. So they don't have to mark them as much. So you have to follow the race on your watch. And so just make sure, I think it's great to have any watch that you can upload the maps to and the routes to so you feel safe. And it has like this great feature, which is like backtrack. So if you do get lost, it'll find, where you started from. And it will you either have two options. One option is you can choose to go back the way you came, or the second option is find me the quickest route to my starting point. And so those are just some features that I think it's important to have those in a trail running watch. So those are probably like for safety's sake, the best features to make sure you have.
Alex, did you load up any maps on your Apple Watch Ultra 2 in the Alps?
I didn't for two reasons. One, we were a group of people and we had guides for the long hike, so I didn't need to. And the second reason was my solo, because I would run solo in the morning because the outings were hikes, so I would make sure to run in the morning, and they were so short that I didn't bother. But otherwise, I would have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've uploaded AllTrails maps for like wayfinding for like basically turn by turn directions, and I've got the Ultra 2 as well, and works really well. And works offline. You can upload them onto your watch, and you don't need to have, a data plan with your cell provider. And in some cases, you're outside of cell range anyway. So,
usually, most oftentimes,
they're super accurate. I've used them with Sunto, with Garmin, and with Apple, and they're all really good. I think you can't go wrong with any of them. All right, let's get out of the weeds with gear. We're done with gear. Mr. Cyr, we'll close this off with circling back to the French Alps with Alex. What were your big takeaways? I mean, obviously, our listeners can go and watch your video and get see your 5 mistakes and what you've learned from them. But like, what are your big takeaways from this? Like, as somebody who has dabbled in trail running, but decidedly more of a road track guy. What what's your final thoughts, your closing thoughts on the trail?
Mm. I and Katelyn might disagree with me. I call trail running and road running two different sports.
Hmm.
They're two different sports. And I think I don't see myself going up to the trails until maybe one day where I feel like I want to try a new challenge. Some people see it as the next progression, the next common progression from the mile to the 5K to the 10K to the marathon to the ultras to the trail. And I don't think it's that straightforward. I think I've known a lot of people who've moved up to the marathon as they've progressed through their careers. And I don't think there's as steep, and no pun intended, as steep a learning curve between, say, the half marathon or probably even the full marathon to the trails, because you're doing a different sport physically and mentally. And I've gained a lot of respect for trail running and trail runners because it's just a different set of skills. I used to look at trail runners as like a variation of road runners and vice versa. But now I look more at trail runners as I look at cyclists. It's that different to me. It's a totally different sport. And as much as I think maybe one day I'll get into cycling, I think maybe one day I'll get into trail running, but I don't see myself leaving the roads. So this is my takeaway. The other thing though is if you're running a lot and you love running and you're getting bored with the scenery, you're getting bored with your times, you're getting bored with the same races, that might be your indicator that maybe you should try the trails. Personally, I'm just not there, but I know some people are.
Yeah, I think it really depends on your personality type. And it's, again, Katelyn and I have talked about this in the past when we're talking about, training for a marathon and know thyself, like self-awareness. We spend a lot of time in our own minds. And when we're running, we spend a lot of time thinking about who we are, what we're doing out there, why we're doing this. There's complex and varied answers to all of those questions for each of us. For myself, I think back to when I was a kid running and I loved running cross country. Maybe it's just like in my mind right now because it's cross country season at my kids' school. And so we're like running cross country and training for cross country a few times a week. But I always think back to like, I guess what I would describe as like the purest form of running, which is just like kind of running free, right? Like just running on a path or a trail that's undulating and varied and challenges you mentally and physically. And I don't really care where it is or like how it's categorized. I just like that phenomenon and that experience. And I think that the trail provides some nice difference and some nice change. I like the competitive nature of road running. I like the idea that there's a measured course and you're sort of like there's like a real mental challenge. It's you against yourself out there when you go out and you try to run, say, like a 5K or a marathon, which are both very, very different and tax different systems, but fundamentally are kind of about the same thing, which is like, how close can you get to the 100% you on that day in terms of performance, mentally and physically. And trail running in an abstract way is probably no different than that. And actually, it becomes a real incredible mental challenge the longer you go. So that's why it's fascinating to me. I think, Alex, a long time ago, I thought the same. I had once thought the same way as well, where it was like, you cap out in the marathon and then it's like, what do I do next? You can't run a PR in the marathon anymore. So maybe I'll get into ultras. I think that that's a very facile way of seeing things. And I think you can do different things at the same time as well. You can be all things. Running, we all contain multitudes. We all can be trail runners and runners. And I think it's the reason why we took on this subject today. Yeah. Right. Okay. So I think that's it. Let's wrap it up for now. We're going to move into a season where we're going to talk quite a bit about the marathon. It's marathon season coming up, gang.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get into doing some on-site podcast reporting. I'm going to Chicago and New York, and so might do some stuff on site there. And we're definitely going to give it a shot doing the kind of instant reaction type podcasts with those events. We had a fun time doing that this summer with the Olympics.
Yeah.
So put that in your head as a listener. Like Sunday, the marathon wraps up. You can turn to our feed shortly afterwards, and we'll nerd out and talk all about the experience of what it's like to run these events and what the elite race was all about and what the vibe was like in the city for the major marathons coming up this fall. All right. So until next week, happy trails.